Can you explain theologically how an innocent child before the age of reason can be possessed? Why would an abuse victim be more prone to possession? As I said a few moments ago, but I didn't say this a few moments ago. Let me start by saying God does not interfere in free will. And so for a child in the womb or a child at the age of 3 or 4, and the word used here, possession, and I don't want to be nitpicky, but I also think it's important to define terms. Possession refers to a person whose body is fully controlled by a demon. Now, those are very rare. There's lots of times where people have a demonic problem, but can function quite normally. You would never know it. They go to work, they have a family, or maybe they're not married, but they can function. If they go to a church, they might have a problem receiving the Eucharist. They might have a problem staying at Mass for the full hour because there'll be a lot of resistance. If they pray, they might have some difficulties doing that. But in general, most of the time when people have demonic issues, they're not full possessions. Now, having said that, let me go back and say, how can I explain theologically how an innocent child can be, let's just use the word possessed. It's because the child has not attained the age of reason, and therefore the child may not be necessarily claimed by Christ. Baptism is the sacrament that claims us for Christ. That's why baptism is so important. It's not magic. But when we celebrate the sacraments, they bind us to Christ. And we celebrate the sacrament of baptism, it claims us for Christ. One of the key components in the solemn rite of exorcism is knowing the demon's name. Why? Because in the same way, at baptism, the deacon, priest, or bishop, if it's a child who's not able to speak for themselves, and the priest, I would ask the couple, what is this child's name? Which is part of the rite. It's not because I'm curious. It goes with the notion of call. So in other words, when the prophets were called by the Father, the Creator, they were called by name. When Jesus calls the 12 apostles, He calls them by name. So when I say to the parents, what is this child's name? And they proclaim it, the child is then ushered into the realm of the light. Conversely, the demon never wants to give its name. Because for the demon to give its name, it means that it is ushered into the light. And it's like the fish out of water. It is antithetical for Satan or the demons to want to be in the light. Because they want to do all they can to disguise themselves, to hide, and to continue staying attached to people, A, because they are intensely lonely. And I don't mean that in any kind of empathetic way. They suffer from intense loneliness. They suffer from intense fear, because if they are expelled, they also then face Satan, because they have failed their missions. And so the whole notion of a child has not attained the age of reason. If the child is older, it all depends on what the child has been exposed to. I've ministered to people where moms and dads were heavily satanic. And the 2 women who I pray over every single month were born into those cults. One was an Illuminati cult, which means it's very structured, it's very deliberate. Everyone in that cult has been brainwashed and programmed. As opposed to a satanic cult where people just kind of get together, worship Satan, might celebrate a black mass, and all of the cult activities end in orgies, always. And so, from a theological point of view, it's that God does not interfere in free will. And that therefore, because God doesn't, God allows, He doesn't impose, but He allows these things to happen. Why would an abuse victim be more prone to possession? Because when people suffer from abuse, not just sexual abuse, but physical abuse as well, verbal abuse, not to the same degree, I don't think, although I'm not a therapist, so I don't want to speak as one. But certainly with sexual abuse, there are soul wounds. There are diametrical kinds of affects that happen when people have been violated in sexual ways that forever change their whole perception of life and their perception of themselves and their ability to relate to others. And therefore they are more exposed to the possibility of something satanic happening. I'm not saying that if a person suffers from sexual abuse, here comes a demon. What I am saying is it creates a soul wound. I would say in my experience that very, very often, if people have been dabbling in the occult and they are abuse victims, the chances of an invitation to a demon really goes way, way up. Could you list a few steps of a proper exorcist? I'm not sure exactly what that means. Okay. Well, first of all, kind of like what I said a little bit ago, I want to begin with, first of all, I want to put them at ease. I want to welcome them. I want to let them know I'm not here to judge them in any way, and I want to try and let them know that I'm not afraid myself. And it's a grace not to be afraid, because I've seen a lot of really gruesome things. Now, in those of you who saw the movie and read the book, before I was a priest, a long time ago, I functioned as a funeral director. I was a licensed embalmer for a number of years before I entered the seminary at age 25. So in that kind of ministry that I was involved in then, I also had to deal with a lot of very difficult situations, which I think really in hindsight has prepared me to do this kind of work with some kind of effect. So I want to let them know that I'm not afraid, because usually when they come, they are afraid. I mean, who wants to go see an exorcist? I mean, it's not something you would normally tell your friends, and it's not something that you would even do with any kind of lightness. So I want to do all I can to reassure them. But then I also want to help build confidence in them, and also try and gain their trust by saying to them, we're here as church to try and provide a kind of healing. And ultimately, we want to get to how can we best help you in the healing process, whether it's over something psychological, which I don't do, but I have people who do, and also people who have faith in doing it. Most therapists, not all, most therapists are non-believers. Not just in Satan, they're non-believers in God. And so even as a priest, long before I ever got into this ministry, when people came to me about issues that really required either a marriage therapist or a counselor of another kind, preferably I would much rather send them to a practicing Catholic therapist, because I want them to be able to be ministered to by someone who's looking at the lens of this person's life through faith and not just through science. That is not to say that science doesn't have a role. Obviously it does. But it is to say that I think faith and science can really complement one another. And then kinds of questions about their background. And then I would always pray over them, which in a sense, to some degree, is kind of part of the diagnostic of discernment. When you pray prayers over people, not exorcism prayers, but prayers of deliverance, and you sort of address evil in a more broad fashion than specifically naming Satan, I want to see whether or not there's any kind of reaction to those prayers. And very often there is, and very often there's not. But it doesn't mean by the end of the first session that I can say, okay, for sure, there's nothing here. Very often, if people haven't opened any doorways, the chances of them having something demonic are probably very slight. And so very often when people can't figure out what's wrong with them, and they've been to therapy for a long time, and the therapist doesn't seem to be making any headway with them, or they've been to a doctor, and they've been to a variety of people, and they're feeling isolated and despondent, it's not unusual for them to think, well, maybe this is something satanic. And my role is there is to direct them and to help them figure out what really they're suffering from. Give us a story or example of someone possessed and how the demon can be removed. Okay. Now, this is a real story, and this involves somebody who's a student at a university, not in this state, but in another state, who's 20 years old. And I'll try and make this as truncated as I can. There are dioceses in the United States where there are no exorcists. And there are dioceses in the United States where there are no exorcists for a variety of reasons. One, because the bishop is afraid. He doesn't know who to appoint. 2, the bishop isn't sure he really believes in the reality of Satan. Or 3, he hasn't had anybody coming to him asking him for this kind of service. So it's usually one of those 3 reasons. In this particular diocese, there was basically a blockade against anyone trying to help this family. And so my bishop happens to be a friend of one of this young man's relatives. So when they came out and we went through the whole discernment, there clearly were manifestations. And the manifestations began with the first session. And there was the rolling of the eyes, and there was a distortion in the face, and there was a change in the body language. And I asked, what is your name? And a name came. And we delivered that spirit out of this young man. And along the way, we spent 8 hours the previous night finding out about the background of this family. And this family, all of the brothers and sisters, not the young man's immediate family, but all of his aunts and uncles that all had experience of demonic problems in their homes. All 5 of them. And what came out of the demon that we delivered the first night was, I said, how did you enter? And he said, it was through a black mass, which means that a cult or a coven had to have prayed a black mass against that family for some reason. So we performed exorcisms on that young man who's a college student at another very high-profile university that you've all heard of. He's a junior, for a period of 4 months. And during that time, there was also disturbances in the home where this young man's family lived, his immediate family. And so what we eventually did, we called up the demons attached to the house to come through that young man in order to deliver him from this demonic oppression. I mean, he was able to go to school. He had a full load of classes. They flew out here from the Midwest every month for 5 months. The last month that he came, which was in June, this was 2 months ago, 3 months ago, he arrived on a Thursday night, and we prayed over him, and we performed the solemn rite of exorcism, and there were manifestations, and we were able to deliver another demon. On Friday, during the course of the exorcism, there were no manifestations, none. And it was very frustrating because there was certainly still something clinging to him. We usually prayed with him for about 2 or 3 hours. It was a very hot day in our neck of the woods. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were all kind of tired. And all of a sudden, as we're praying the rite of exorcism, there was an incredibly strong storm-like wind. Now, I'm not making any of this up. There were 6 of us who were there. There was an incredible, strong, storm-like wind that came blowing over the roof of our church. Now, this is an 80-degree afternoon, and there's no wind. And where we're located, in the back of the church, I always do the exorcisms in the church, in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. I could see through the window that looks out from the sacristy, and I can see that great big tree there bent over like this. And we all stopped. I stopped the prayers, and we're all looking at each other and going, what in God's name is that? That went on for about 1.5 minutes. And the roof was flapping. I mean, it was like a storm in December, January. The wind stops, and then the other exorcist who's working with me from a diocese across the bay and another person on the prayer team said, what is that terrible smell? And I says, I don't smell anything. Now, the other 3 of us besides me, we didn't smell anything. But it smelled like, pardon my French, it smelled like shit. So that went on for about 1 minute. And then this young man just simply speaks up and says, I feel like something went rushing right through me. And it was very good. He was delivered. He's never had another satanic problem. Now, that little miracle, that was observed by 6 of us. And I have no doubt in my mind the Holy Spirit was clearly at work. And that's one example, a real recent one and a fresh one that wasn't just with my own eyes, but 5 other eyewitnesses who were there to see that happen. And when those things occur, it just gives you that much more affirmation, not only how real this is, but how powerful the presence of God is in all of this.
You said somebody didn't want that to take place. In the beginning, you said somebody didn't want that exorcism to take place.
It wasn't that they didn't want the exorcism to take place. They celebrated a black mass against that family. We don't know why. And it was the demon who actually said that. I said, how did you get in a black mass? Who did the black mass? I can't say. So
Why would a demon tell you the truth?
they have to, because not to sound like I'm tooting my own horn here. They're legalists. So when I say, and I don't just say, oh, by the way, and I'm not being sarcastic, oh, by the way, tell me your name. I have to be very declarative. I have to say, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, I demand you tell me who you are. They have to, because I have an authority that they have to pay attention to. Now, another priest could say that, but I'm the mandated exorcist. So as the mandated exorcist, I have the authority of the bishop. And the authority of holy orders is very, very powerful in our church. Much more powerful than I have to say I even realized until I became the exorcist. So they have to tell you. They will do everything they can not to, but eventually they have to. And then oftentimes you invoke the Blessed Mother. And you call upon her to persuade him. And you call upon Michael the Archangel to bring warring angels against this demon, to force it to tell you. So you don't necessarily just do it in the name of Jesus Christ only, but you start off with that. So I say that, and I have to say that in a very authoritative way. So, and they're legalists. So if you say, well, in the name of Jesus, well, there's all kinds of Jesuses. In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, there's only one. And they have to tell you. Can you expand on what exactly the doorway in which a demon enters man? A doorway would be a portal, an opening. So, for example, an invitation. So I mentioned earlier about sexual abuse being a doorway. Pornography is a doorway. Methamphetamine, cocaine, other hallucinogenic drugs, they're doorways. Why? Because they create openings. Much of the drugs that come into the United States have been cursed by the very gangs and cartels that are shipping them here, because most of the cartels are satanic themselves. You go on the cable network and you watch any of these documentaries about even gangs in LA, or I'm assuming gangs on the East Coast, many of them will talk about Satan as their master. Many of these gangs and cartels are satanic and are inspired satanically. And the drugs that come into this country very often have had satanic curses placed on them. And I've had people tell me that, who have been people who are former drug users or people who are former gang members. Even law enforcement will tell you. There was just we had a big forum out in California, which I was not invited to come. They wouldn't let me come. And it was for the Sheriff's Department in San Francisco, San Mateo, and Northern California, coming to talk about the increased amount of satanic occult activity in our cities. And this is in California. I'm sure it's no different in your state. And there's a growing amount of this. Benedict XVI said this after about 2 years of being Pope. He said, as faith diminishes, superstition increases. And that's what's happening. There's more and more people involved in these kinds of activities, oftentimes out of curiosity. Oftentimes because they're looking for stuff, and they're looking for answers, and they're looking for power that traditional prayer and spirituality through the Catholic tradition or other Christian traditions doesn't provide them. So the doorways are openings. Doorways have to do with, what have you done to invite this demon? Or what have you done that somehow opens you up? You know, all you got to do is go on the internet. And I had one of the teachers at the school where I'm pastor, I came and saw me about 4 years ago, when she found on her son's computer a website that was entitled Teens for Satan. So I went on the website just to see. It's there. So this stuff is very easy access. How do you feel about mediums who claim that they have messages from God? I would be suspicious of any mediums in general. Also, by engaging a medium, you become a medium too. So mediums are people who are involved in idolatry. So anybody who says they're getting messages from God, I would take that as highly suspect. I wouldn't say that they're frauds. I would just say I'd be highly suspicious, and I would not personally involve myself with people who are mediums, because you don't know. Even if they think they've gotten messages from God, they may have tapped into the spirit world and actually may have been dealing with a disguised demon. What are the after effects of encountering evil on the exorcist, the victim, and the others who are present? How long does it take to recover? That's a great question. It's very exhausting. In my earliest days of being an exorcist, I made the mistake of thinking that I could go from one thing to another. And people would say to me, especially if I was in the church for 2-3 hours and performing an exorcism, and then I would go to a parish council meeting, a half an hour later, people would say, "What happened to you?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" "Father, you look terrible." So I would go and I would look at my face in the mirror and go, "Well, geez, I think I look all right." But I had too many people say, and I'm not being vain, I had too many people say to me, "Father, you don't look very good. You look kind of washed out." So now I take much more time. It's exhausting. Because when you're battling, even with a prayer group, you're battling, trying to expel this demon, they're going to do everything they can not to go. And this takes a tremendous amount of energy, time, and prayer, before, during, and after. Another after effect, a lot of times I get attacked. I get attacked in ways that I would just consider kind of in a broad way. I get attacked in terms of lust. And so I've had to find ways to manage that and deal with that in a way that's much more balanced. As I was saying to Brother Ken and some of the other brothers today, when you get ordained a priest, and the same would be true for becoming a brother or a sister, one's libido does not die. However, the intensity at times of what I've had at times struggle with at age 55 and 56 was nothing like at age 30. And so there's a direct correlation, as I came to realize, between being involved in this ministry and experiencing attacks. So it takes prayer from others, prayer on my own part, time before the Blessed Sacrament, so that I'm really fortified to be able to do this. And the victim as well. I mean, you can only do this for a while on a given session, because it takes a tremendous amount of energy out of the person you're praying over. It isn't just me or the prayer team. It's exhausting on the other person. It can affect them. It can cause depression. It can cause them to lose heart sometimes. And so, every time I celebrate Mass, I'm always praying for the people that I'm either who I'm involved with, either in terms of deliverance and or exorcism. How long does it take to recover? I'd say a few hours. I'm pretty good the next day. How is our free will received from God compatible with demonic influences or possession caused by someone else? Well, I think the compatibility is that God does not interfere in free will. And, the question was asked this morning at the staff meeting at the Lumen Center. Why does God permit this? And I'll give you the answer that was given to me by the exorcist, my mentor, which to me makes a lot of sense. It's for God's greater glory. So God permits this for God's greater glory. God permits this so that people will have a real clear understanding of what they're choosing. If you choose to live in the realm of the Lord, there are incredible benefits. Now, does it mean we're going to have a perfect life? No. Does it mean we're not going to suffer? No. Does it mean we're not going to sin? No. But it means we're going to have redemption. You live in the realm of the darkness. There is no redemption. There is no future. And there is no light. And so God gives Satan boundaries. God could snuff Satan out in a moment, in a God moment. But God permits Satan certain kinds of limitations along the way. And the ordinary means of protection against Satan or evil, personified or otherwise, there's 4. A moral life, a prayer life, a sacramental life, and a faith life. I tell that to people all the time. When people say to me, how do we make sure this doesn't happen? You employ those 4 dimensions in your life. The chances of anything of what we're talking about tonight happening are very, very slight. But that has to be part of our rhythm, because the satanic realm is getting louder and louder. Now, there's lots of theories as to why that might be, but there is more of this kind of activity that's going on, and there are more people that are tapping into that realm. The spirit realm we don't know a whole lot about. Christ gives us a vehicle to get there, and to use that vehicle as opposed to the means that are anti-God or placing other powers ahead of God are only going to cause us ultimately great suffering and great harm. How close is the movie to what you experienced? Well, as I've told folks before, it's a movie. So some things are real. In the movie starts out, I'm working for my dad. He was not in the funeral business. My mother did not die when I was 10. I'll tell you a quick little funny. My mother said to me, when I went to Budapest to work on the movie with Anthony Hopkins, and I saw the movie sets, and I met, obviously, Anthony Hopkins and the young guy who plays me, and the little boy who was me at 10 years old, and I said to him, you're playing me when I'm 10. And of course, he was looking at me, he was trying to figure it out, and his mother was there, and she said, this is the man you're playing at your age. He was a very darling kid. But, I worked on those exorcism scenes, some of them, and the movement of the woman who's pregnant in that movie, that's very authentic. Demons can manipulate body movements in ways that one could not imagine being manipulated physically. That's all true. All that went on in those scenes is very accurate. Now, there's a scene in that movie where I walk into a room and there's a whole bunch of frogs on the floor. How many of you remember that scene? Okay. Now, that did not happen. However, I watched that movie with Anthony Hopkins, he and I, in Hollywood, just the 2 of us. So I'm looking at this critically, and I'm also thinking, this is partly about me, so it's very emotional. But the cleverness of that is it goes back to the satanic attacks. I talked about lust. But how do you put that on a screen? And so the frogs were meant to intimidate my character, Michael Kovac, to intimidate him and scare him and tell him, stay out of this. We don't want you involved in this. Satan cannot predict the future. Demons cannot predict the future. But they have some sense of the future. And so in the movie, as in real life, if Satan at all had some sense that my character was moving in the direction of being an exorcist, oh heck, they don't want to deal with me or guys that are priests that are doing this or anyone involved in deliverance. Why? Because we're the enemy. So that was meant to be a satanic attack. The issue about there was the scene with the donkey with the red eyes. Now, I've never experienced that. But I could not say that those kinds of manifestations could not happen. The spitting of the nails, I've never experienced, but my mentor has. And the other priest who was taking the course with me in Rome, he had observed that as well. And that usually comes from a curse, where a witch, or in the Mexican tradition, for example, the Hispanic tradition, they're called curanderos or brujas. They'll take an article of clothing or some other article that is identified with a person and a picture, and they'll do a spell on it. And somehow that object will end up somehow lodged within the person's body. And of course, then it can cause great suffering, and it's all done for that purpose. So, at the end of the movie, when my character delivers Father Lucas, he was a deacon in the movie. In other words, that's a step below priesthood. So he didn't actually perform the solemn rite of exorcism. He prayed one of the prayers of the ritual of exorcism, the formal rite. He prayed one of the prayers which is legitimate for a deacon to do. But he didn't actually pray the whole rite. And a priest, like the clergy who are here tonight, unless they have a mandate from their bishop, they can't pray the whole solemn rite. But they could pray a prayer out of the solemn rite. Can you explain anything about Illuminati, Freemasons? Well, Illuminati is kind of a term that refers to the highest level of satanic cults in the world. And they're all, and I don't know much about them, they're all interconnected in one way or another, and they all communicate with each other. The highest levels of Freemasonry are also involved in matters of satanic. So if a person joins the Masons, and he happens to be of a low degree, it's really largely a fraternal organization which does a lot of good. But at the highest levels of Masonry, they are involved in matters of the satanic. And then, as you know, Masonry is a very secret fraternity. I don't know much about it. I've tried to find materials on it. It's very difficult to find materials on it, but I do know from other exorcists whom I speak with who have much more expertise in this, that the very highest degrees, the 32nd, 33rd degrees, are involved in matters of the satanic.
Folks, we'll just do a couple more questions.
What is the difference between someone who needs an exorcism and someone who's under spiritual attack? I think the difference is in the manifestations and what they've opened themselves up to. So, for example, a lot of times people will call me locally and they'll say, you know, I just feel like there's a presence that's caused me to have a sense of hopelessness or great fear or hatred. And they'll come and I'll pray prayers of deliverance to dispel whatever may be coming against them. They're really more prayers of protection. And exorcism really involves where there's been a determination that there's actually a preternatural entity that is actually engaged in their lives. That would be the biggest difference. So the last thing an exorcist does is a formal exorcism. When a person is baptized as an infant, there's what they call a minor exorcism prayer. When people go through the rite of Christian initiation of adults, and they go through what's called the scrutinies on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Sundays of Lent, those are minor exorcisms. Deliverance prayers are minor exorcisms because you're addressing the condition of evil rather than the person of evil.
Last question.
How do you know when an exorcism has been successful? That's a very good question. Largely, it's a matter of judgment. First of all, when the manifestations stop, you don't stop the prayers. You continue praying for a time until you make a judgmental decision that the demon is fully gone. So, when the manifestations leave, but then demons can sometimes hide. And they want you to believe they're gone. So you don't just stop when they all just kind of end. You pray for a time. And then you usually invite the person to come back again for what I would call, and what we tend to call, kind of a cleanup. Just to make sure that that demon and the rest of the demons... See, demons never come... There's never one. They come, we call them gangs. And they operate in a hierarchy, just like the angels do. So in the hierarchy of angels, they're not all equally powerful, and they're not all equally intelligent. What separates us from the angels is angels are pure spirits. They travel much faster than we do. They are far more intelligent than we are, and they have a much greater sense of clarity of free will than we do. And so when you're delivering and the manifestations end, you want to continue and then usually do another session to make sure that what is gone is gone. And that also assumes that they're all gone. Because the weakest demons are the ones that are easiest to deliver first. The more powerful ones are the ones that take far much more time to get out. And you know you're getting to the end when you're having much more difficulty delivering the person from the demonic attachments.